All right, and we're live. Thanks everybody for tuning into this edition of No Capes after a rather lengthy hiatus. I am now in New York City, so this is the first NYC No Capes, and I am here with Adam Culp. Say hi, Adam.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having me, Kayla.
No problem. I'm honored to have you on. So for anyone who doesn't know, Adam Culp is a stand-up guy, for one. He's also the organizer of SoFlo PHP and Sunshine PHP, among other things. So let's get into it. I want to start kind of general at first. How did you get started as a developer?
As a developer, started quite a while ago, actually. I wasn't a developer originally. I was in sales and worked as a car salesman, insurance salesman, door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesman. I did it all. And that's where my background comes from originally. I was working for a cabinetry company in the late 90s. And that company didn't really have a lot of reporting within the company. And I was a district manager. I was in charge of 5 stores. It was on my route, right? And I went to those 5 stores on a weekly basis, 1 day per store, and worked my way up to an area manager, which means that I then had 5 area managers who each had 5 stores. And then I moved my way up to a regional manager of the Midwest, which was from Kansas all the way to Ohio, clear up to Minnesota, that whole area there. And there was no reporting within the company, surprisingly enough. So I created my own. I created my own spreadsheets, created my own reports, and I really grew the area and grew the profitability of the area. Well, the company was, the manufacturing base was in Ohio. The headquarters was in Florida. And they caught their attention and they said, you know what, you are doing a pretty good job. We'd like to have you come down to Florida and help build these reports for the rest of the country. And of course, I jumped on that because it was in Florida. I'm from Ohio, lived in Ohio all my life, except for a short stint in the military. But I came down to Florida, helped build those reports. And then after 9/11 happened and all the stuff there, then it downsized and the company ended up moving their headquarters. And I stayed in Florida. But while I was building those reports, it became abundantly clear that I couldn't continue building the Excel reports for the entire country without some sort of automation. So I quickly learned how to do automation with OLAP database and some other tools to mine the OLAP database and come up with automated reports for the country. And through that, I started doing web interfaces, started doing websites as a side hobby, using Dreamweaver and just doing plain old HTML sites. And that's how I kind of broke into web. Very quickly realized I would really like to do some more things automated instead of just static HTML sites. It was becoming a thing, right? So I started out doing some Perl, and then eventually doing a little bit of Cold Fusion, a little bit of .NET. At that time, it wasn't .NET, it was ASP. But it was so expensive. It was hard for me to have a server because, of course, Cold Fusion cost about $1,200 and a Windows license for the server was $800. So it really quickly added up. And I said, that's not for me. So then I started focusing on Perl. And at that point, I ran across an extension for Dreamweaver. Dreamweaver did not support PHP at that time, but I ran across an extension that allowed you to do automated PHP creation of scripts and things in Dreamweaver. So I started doing that, very quickly became more advanced to the point where I was always in code view and wasn't even using the extension anymore. I was just doing code view. And then of course the new versions of Dreamweaver came out and it supported PHP out of the box without the plugin, and it just kept growing from there. I mean, that was in early 2000s, right? And just kept growing from there, started using IDEs. At that point, it was Zen Studio because it was really the only IDE that was able to carry its own weight at the time. And then moved into Zen Framework and some other things, and just it kind of progressed and to the point where I am now. So that's how I broke into it.
Awesome. I think that's a pretty interesting story. I particularly find it interesting that you started in sales. I put myself through college working in sales. So I have a kind of a soft spot for it, soft spot / hatred. And I'm interested, do you think having been in sales affects positively or negatively your career or your role as a developer? Or?
I think I think it's very positively impacted, because the thing is because I have the background in sales, I have the unique sight to be able to talk with business people and understand what they need and still be able to translate it to code. And that's always been a plus. That's always been a benefit as I've been doing development, because business people can actually tell me what they want. I really understand it and can actually build the code to create their vision. And so I've spent a lot of time with startups and been able to do that quite well. I think many times people who focus in sales, they aren't able to understand the technical aspects. People who focus in technical and they're programmers, oftentimes they don't understand business and aren't able to translate the needs into actual product. So I think I kind of come at it a little bit differently than what most developers would. And I'm sure you've probably noticed that yourself if you have a sales background. You know, it just allows us to look at things through different lenses, right? And be able to interpret it.
Yeah, no, I think having been on the other side of that fence, and as a salesperson, I need X resource and I need it because of this reason. A lot of times you have developers that are like, you don't need that, or I don't think you need that. And I see that now being, on the developer side of the fence. I've worked with lots of colleagues that tell stakeholders or, the people out there that are moving the money, essentially, like, you don't really need that. And for me, it's always been, I don't know, a good understanding of what it's like to be over there and to have needs. And I think it translates well. It's always been a benefit for my career. I'm rather glad that I did that.
Yep. I think often developers with the best of intentions can go back to business people and say, no, you shouldn't do that, right? But having the sales background allows me to quantify why you shouldn't do that. And so generally business is a little bit more accepting because I can say it in terms that they comprehend. And they're like, okay, I can understand now why I shouldn't do that. It's not a simple no, it is a no, but here's why, or no, but here's the resources that I need to dedicate to accomplish that if I so desire to continue with it.
Right, yeah, that's a much more eloquent way of saying it. But yeah, absolutely. So having come from a I would say non-traditional necessarily path to get to where you are, did you have during that path in your progression, it sounds like you were mostly self-taught, and the way you were self-taught is pretty interesting. I didn't know that Dreamweaver can auto generate PHP scripts. It kind of scares me, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it made it really easy to do the CRUD. Anything more advanced than that gets a little bit tricky, but you could definitely go through Dreamweaver and do code generation for the CRUD really easily. It may be more advanced now or less, I don't know, but that's pretty much what I used it for.
It's pretty cool. I never even knew that. I still have nightmares about Dreamweaver, but that's just like, drag and drop WYSIWYG stuff.
Well, now that's a separate story. Yeah, yeah. Nightmares that aside.
Right. There's a support group somewhere, I'm sure. So during this progression, or even currently, who are your biggest role models as a developer?
I think that's changed over time. I mean, lately, and by lately, I mean maybe the last 6 or so years, right? I mean, my role models have been Uncle Bob Martin and Martin Fowler. I think they're pretty much tied for my role models now because they've really driven a lot of my career through their contributions. I think by reading the refactoring book from Martin Fowler, and then after that reading the clean code book, those two have really shaped a lot of my thinking and a lot of the direction that I come from in my daily speaking at conferences, as well as the way that I work. Because I've incorporated refactoring and learned a lot more about my code, looking at it through a refactoring lens, and then also incorporating the clean code is just a win-win. And so those two are my current role models. In the past, of course, it was Linus Torvalds. I really looked up to him earlier before I started delving too deeply into PHP. At that time, I was learning Linux and programming in Perl and CGI and things like that prior to PHP. So again, that's kind of shifted. Now I'm looking more at architecture. So
there's some pretty, I think a great deal of us look up to those people. Definitely good influences. You actually, I believe, give a talk on refactoring now, don't you?
Yeah, it's one of my most popular talks. I actually have two different talks on refactoring. One is based on the refactoring book by Martin Fowler. And I actually, the book itself, through the refactoring, it has code samples in there written in Java. I actually wrote a PHP version of all that code that goes along with the book. So if you wanted PHP to go along instead of looking at the Java samples, you could do that. It's out on my GitHub. The repo is Refactoring 101. And it goes along with my Refactoring 101 talk, which generally, I mean, I've been fortunate that talk seems to be a hot topic among the programming community in PHP, because it pretty much packs the house every time I give that talk. Doesn't matter how many times I give it. It seems like every conference, there's always a new group of people, really starving for that content. And generally it's standing room only, no matter what size room they put me in. I think last year I spoke at OSCON, and it was funny. OSCON, at first they put me in a room that was able to seat 60. And then a little bit, and as people register for OSCON, they actually register and they say, I'm going to listen to this talk and this talk. I mean, they're not committing, but they're saying this is what I'm most likely to choose. And so a couple of weeks into the registration, they said, well, we need to move you up to a room that seats 80. And then a couple of weeks later, we need to move you up to a room that seats 120. And a couple of weeks later, we need to move you up to a room that seats 200. And by the time it was said and done, I was in a room that seats 300, and it was still standing room only. There were people standing on the side. So again, it's just a hot topic that I guess I deliver okay. And so people come and listen. And my other refactoring talk is actually based on a book by Paul Jones, who's big in the PHP community. A good friend of mine from Nashville. I actually wrote the foreword for his book, Modernizing Legacy Code. And he asked me to write the foreword for the book. And it's a great book. It's small, nice and easy to read. But my talk, I have a talk called Refactoring. Mine is Refactoring Legacy Code. His book is Modernizing Legacy Code. And again, that one seems to get a really good response as well. I've worked with Paul to make that talk as good as I can, and so the talk is based on his book. So my most popular talks are based on other people's books. However, I am working on my own book, Refactoring 101, which is going to be kind of a PHP. It's going to be like Martin Fowler's refactoring, but with a PHP twist. So I'm working on that. Martin Fowler has also said that he would help me on it if I needed some help, and talked with his publishers as well. So I don't know where it's going to be published yet. Don't know exactly when it's going to be released, but watch for that. It's coming. I've got a major portion of it written, and some good stuff there. It's not a copy paste of his book at all. It's completely different, and also done with the PHP twist.
That's awesome. Congratulations on your upcoming book. So you were, being friends with Paul, able to get his feedback, and sounds like you know Martin too. Or have you ever gotten feedback on that talk from him?
I don't know him, but I emailed him to see if he was interested, because in his book Refactoring, the Ruby community actually wrote a Ruby edition of the refactoring book. And when I saw that, I thought, you know what? I've been wanting to do a Refactoring 101 book to go with my talks. So since there's already a Ruby edition of his book, why wouldn't we do a PHP edition? And so not do a Refactoring 101 exactly, do a Refactoring PHP edition. So I reached out to him and I said, you know what, I think this is of interest in the PHP community, because I've been given all these talks and everything. And he was all for it. He said, yeah, I don't know much about PHP. I don't program in PHP, don't know the first thing about it, but by all means, if I can help you with the book, let me know. So we'll see where that goes. One thing that he did caution is the Ruby book didn't really take off because it was a little bit too close to his book. So in the Ruby community was a little bit vocal about that. So that's why with my book, I've gone a little bit different direction. I always take advice of people who have been there and know what they're talking about. I'm not into recreating the wheel and copying bad things, right? So I did take it in a much different direction, but yet still people are able to learn the same lessons just a little bit differently. And like I said, it is very much a PHP twist on that book, and it's very strong in PHP and refactoring. Some additional refactors that are only applicable to PHP versus Java, And of course, there's some things in Java that aren't applicable to PHP, so those aren't in there either. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. It should be really good.
Awesome. I'm excited for it too. A few things on your book, if you don't mind, a quick question. Are you targeting a specific version of PHP? So like refactoring 5.6, or are you going all the way up to 7? So I assume that'll change things.
So the refactoring itself, I mean, refactoring in itself is not really version specific, right? Refactoring can be applicable to anything. So through refactoring, it leverages using certain patterns to refactor more efficiently. And although it doesn't really focus on here's this pattern, here's that pattern, it's not a patterns book. But oftentimes refactoring, leads to the use of patterns, and patterns really don't care what version of PHP you're using, right? As long as it's object-oriented 5.3 or above, you would probably be able to leverage it in some way. I mean, the newer versions, of course, we have traits at 5.4, 5.5, 5.6. Then you start getting into short syntax for arrays, and coming into 7, there's going to be some additional things. But that being said, refactoring doesn't need all these new things that we've really developed since the object model of 5.3, right? So there might be some additional tips that I would include based on version, using short array syntax for the later versions of 5, or version 7, some of the new things coming. I might include some of those as additional tips maybe. It's like, okay, here's the refactor, but if you're using version 7, maybe you can incorporate this additional functionality that is only available in 7. So that'll be interesting to see some of those tips unfold, but the base refactors themselves don't really require some of those new functionalities that we have just of late.
I think that's probably the wisest choice. I mean, the best, and it makes it more evergreen, I think. Yeah. Now, going back to your OSPON talk, I'm pretty floored by this. You essentially had an attendance at a single talk that is equivalent to some attendances for entire conferences.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the refactoring just tends to draw a good crowd. I remember one of the first times I gave that talk was at Midwest PHP. And Midwest PHP that year, I think they had 180 attendees. And I think the talks, they did 3 tracks, and the other 2 talks that were opposite me had like 2 or 3 people in the room. Meanwhile, in mine, I had people in the front, sitting on the floor in the aisles. People were standing in the doorway trying to see over top of each other. So yeah, I mean, it's just been a hot topic. I
like to think for that, right?
Rasmus, yeah.
Yeah, you Rasmused some people.
I did. I Rasmused that time slot, and that talk, because of its nature, because it is a hot topic in PHP, it tends to draw large crowds. Yeah.
Wow, awesome. So since we're talking about speaking, let's do a little bit of that.
Sure.
How long have you been speaking?
So speaking, it's kind of a tricky thing, right? In the PHP community, I've really only been speaking now for about 4 years. At conferences, only about 2.5 years. Prior to that, of course, I was in sales, so I spoke all the time. I was always, I was teaching people how to sell. I was holding seminars at the different companies that I worked for, whether it was insurance sales or vacuum cleaner sales, what have you, and I was holding seminars. So I've been doing that for a while. But yeah, for PHP, I'd say it's about 2.5 years at conferences. I started speaking originally when I started the user groups, SoFlo PHP. And the reason that came about is because, of course, as an organizer, it's hard to find people to talk. So I ended up being the speaker.
Okay, so coming from sales, and, again, similarity there. So I know a little bit about that and doing seminars, and I used to do a lot of tutorials and stuff. But I find that there's something like really inherently different between giving a technical talk and a talk like a seminar. Do you find that there's a big difference there, or is it pretty much the same?
That's a tough one. So I think it's similar, right? And now in technical, when you're giving a technical talk, it takes a little bit more attention, because, for instance, if you're demoing code while you're talking, that's like juggling. You're because your brain is occupied, you're occupying literally both sides of your brain at that point, because you have your technical side and your creative side fighting each other, for the floor. And so it can be really hard. Now, whereas when you're doing sales training, it's mostly your creative side. There's very little technical there. It's mostly just the creative side at work, because you're doing sales, you're doing interpersonal type of interactions. So yeah, I guess it is different. The talks that I tend to do best at are the ones, and I encourage other speakers to do this as well, is I generally don't do live coding. I'm not good at live coding. I'm an okay programmer. I do a pretty good job programming, but I'm not good enough to be able to do it live and talk at the same time. So I tend to do a lot of screen captures of my code and put it on slides, and I talk about it on the slides. I'm not live coding because I know my strengths, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I could, by all means, I could live code, but there's going to be a lot of dead air while I'm doing that. I can't sing and dance at the same time. So I always encourage other speakers to, figure out your strength. There are people who are very good at live coding. There's a member of my user group, Michael Musa, who does a PHP unit talk. He can code and talk and never even skip a beat. And it's wonderful. I love listening to him because he's a good speaker and he can sit and code, much better than I can while he's talking. It's just amazing. I can't do that. So I do screenshots of code and I highlight the code with my laser pointer as I'm talking about it. And it seems to work. I make it work. But at the same time, I couldn't possibly do live coding and talking at the same time. Maybe someday when I grow up, I'll be able to do that, but not yet.
Yeah, I've heard nightmares about live coding, so it's definitely not something that I do.
There are some people who do it quite well, but it's rare. It's rare.
Definitely a skill. Put that on your resume. Can live code. Do you remember what your first PHP talk was?
So when I started the user group, I needed some talks. So my first talks were actually kind of soft. They were setting up a development environment and how to do that, because at that point we started out the user group. The Art Institute in Fort Lauderdale gave us some space. Excuse me. And so the first meetings were people out of the Art Institute. Some of our first meetings were mostly those folks, and they were mostly web designers. They weren't programmers, so they didn't understand a lot of the common things like setting up your dev environment and the tools that you can use to develop code. So those were my beginning talks, starting out. And then as the group grew and we started getting more actual developers versus designers, then it started getting more technical to keep up with that. And that's where, and my skill as speaking technically also got better as I went. So that's why I started, migrating towards more technical talks. And now I've got about 9 or 10 talks that I could give at any one time. It just ask for the talk and I can completely pull out the slide deck and just go with it. I mean, I've got about 9 talks, anything from refactoring legacy code to Zen Framework 2 to Git. I have an essential Git for developers that's very popular. I have a clean application development, which is kind of a play on clean code, but it's more toward the entire development stack and flow. I have a Vagrant talk that does quite well, but yeah, got quite a few of them.
You have a favorite?
My favorite is my most current, actually. I have one of Does Your Code Measure Up? And that one is about using code quality tools to rate the quality of your code, using some of the packages off of PHP QA tools and Code Climate and some of these other tools that are now available. They seem to be sprouting out of the woodwork. Everybody's using these PHP QA tools and building a front end for folks to use it in a more friendly manner. So it's all good. But that talk currently is my favorite because it's my newest. I think emotionally, though, my most favorite talk is the Refactoring 101 because I still get so many attendees for that one, and it seems to be a hot spot. But clean application development is pretty good too, though. that one's kind of a hot spot for me, because recently I've had developers actually walk up to me and say that talk changed my job. It changed the way that I code. It changed the way my team is coding because I took the talk back to them. And so that's a pretty amazing feeling.
Yeah, that's got to be super gratifying.
Yeah.
So how many times do you normally give a talk? Do you ever retire your talks, or do you just keep giving them?
So I haven't yet. I submit all my talks to the conferences unless I've already given a talk at a conference, at a certain conference. Like if I've given my Refactoring 101 at a conference a year or 2 years ago, I don't resubmit that one. But all my talks, like I said, I have about nine or 10 talks that I submit to all the conferences as long as I haven't given it before. Because I think, so my talks center around refactoring and code quality and things like that. And I think there's still a huge need for that. I think there's still a lot of developers who need those talks. So I'm very passionate about the topics. I'm very passionate about the content. So I still do submit those talks. I build more talks, of course. That's why I'm up to 9 or 10, because I still build the new ones as people approach me and say, you know what, maybe you should talk about this, or maybe this is a good topic. But my old tried and true talks still are being submitted because, like I said, I think there's still a need out there. I'm still filling rooms with a essential Git for developers talk. I'm at the beginning of that talk, I ask everybody how many people are using Git, and it's still less than half the room. So I think there's still need for these talks.
Good. I mean, as long as people still want to hear them and you still want to give them, I'd say carry on.
Exactly. Yeah.
What do you think is the most challenging part of giving a talk?
The most challenging part, well, for me, I mean, I've always been pretty decent at talking because I learned that through my sales background, right? So that kind of comes easy. I mean, I am introverted by nature. I would rather sit behind my desk, but I get out and I give these talks because I like helping people. And I think the talks that I give, it is helping people. So that's kind of why I do it. You know, that's why I get out from behind my desk. It's certainly, I mean, sure, there's a little bit of ego there, but most of it is, you know, me wanting to help other people. That's really what, I mean, ego itself would not get me out from behind my desk. But that being said, I think the hardest part is asking for feedback and ratings and then reading them afterwards. Sometimes people are honest. Well, I'd say most times people are honest. It's very rare that somebody just completely gave me a poor rating. I don't have many of those, but I think that the people who did give me a poor rating expected something different from the talk. I don't know why. Had they read the abstract, they would have known exactly what the talk was about. But occasionally you get somebody in there who says, "Oh, this Git talk was basic." Well, it's essential. It's not meant to be advanced, right? But that being said, I mean, that's probably the hardest part for me because I want to, you know, again, I do this to help other people. I get gratitude from that. And so the ratings are definitely take an emotional toll based on the ratings. I appreciate the ratings. That's a totally different matter. But it does take an emotional toll. As you see them start coming in, you see a 5 and a 5, then a 4, then a 3, then, you know, and it's like a roller coaster.
Yeah, I remember my first 1-star rating was a bit of a gut punch. That sucked. Have you ever gotten like mean or nasty reviews, or are they normally just constructive feedback?
I've only gotten really one mean one. I gave a talk early on. It was actually my clean application development talk. And there was a person in there who was really gung-ho agile. And in that talk, I say something slightly controversial, which is agile is not for developers. It was not developed for developers. No, I don't mean that it wasn't intended for developers at all. And that's not at all what I say. But I say it was mostly meant for business people. It's meant to pull business people into the development loop. and meant to give them visibility into the development cycle. That's what Agile is, at least my take on it. Developers could happily develop any way they want to, but Agile helps pull the business in if the business participates. And this person just got really terrible about it. They got really bent out of shape. I'm like, it's my opinion. Take it or leave it. I'm not saying you have to believe what I believe. I'm not saying you have to do it. I mean, it's my opinion. If you don't like my opinion, that's fine. But they got really nasty. They even went as far as to go on my blog, and they dug through years of my blog to find blog posts of when I was first learning to do things. And then they came back and they left comments on the blog post saying, wow, you're an architect and you're the user group organizer and you're this and you're that. Why would you even blog about this? And I'm like, dude, that was 5 years ago when I didn't know what I was doing. So of course I blogged about it. It was awesome. But anyway, it got really ugly at one point and I just kind of ignored it and eventually it went away.
That's a pretty big personal investment for someone to make. In you, but okay, so the majority of them are good feedback, and even though it's sometimes hard to take, that's okay. I've known a lot of people who are kind of scared, I guess, of nasty, mean, joined in reviews. Yeah. So I always like to ask. I
just drink another beer and let it go.
Let it go. Very, very frozen. Let it go.
Yeah.
You actually, and I know this from firsthand experience, give excellent feedback. I've gotten some fantastic feedback on talks that I think really helped me.
I'm glad.
As a speaker. So is that, I mean, I say it kind of as giving back. So, as speakers, we need constructive feedback, but it's also, I think, helpful to give feedback back. Is that something that you do often, something you enjoy doing?
It is something that I do. I like to think it's welcomed. So thank you for that. But yeah, I enjoy doing it because I want to see PHP do better as an ecosystem. I want to see people do better, and giving better talks is part of that, right? If we're delivering better talks during conferences and during user group meetups and things like that, then the overall community benefits from that. So for me, it's a goal of mine. I mean, that's part of why I started a user group. That's part of why I have a conference, and that's part of why I help with ZenCon. All these things kind of come together. It's my underlying goal to help PHP, and giving good feedback to speakers, good honest feedback. Not necessarily. I don't consider it constructive criticism because I don't really. I try not to criticize. I try to give good constructive feedback. And I think that helps. It makes it better for the next attendees listening to that person. I mean, I've coached many speakers. I've coached speakers down here in South Florida through the user group to bring more not only more diversity to the PHP speaking space, but also to bring more speakers. I've also coached other speakers who have gone on to give keynotes within the PHP community. They can comment if they feel like it, but I've coached them and said, well, help them tweak their talks, help them tweak the way that they deliver talks, and it's added up to become some really good keynotes given at some of the conferences. So I'm kind of glad to do that. I haven't actually given a keynote myself, but the thing is, I didn't have anything that was worthy. Most of my talks are that. They are talks. They are meant to, that it's not keynote ready, right? However, I will be giving a keynote at Bulgaria. So they approached me and they said, can you give a keynote? And I said, well, yeah, I can. So now I'm creating it. But it should be a fun talk. It should be really great. I hope it gets accepted at more conferences than just Bulgaria. So I'll be feeding it around after Bulgaria. And I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome. When is Bulgaria?
That's in toward the end of September.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And in a roundabout way, I mean, you counseled me, I guess, if that's the right word, on speaking, and I'm giving my first keynote next month in Prague.
That's great.
So inadvertently or unknowingly, I guess you helped another speaker. So that's awesome. And congrats on the keynote spot. I know for me at least, it's a huge honor to be asked. So this actually segues really nicely into a question that we got on Twitter from Tessa Merrow. She wants to know what motivated you or brought you to start contributing to a community.
So that I've kind of covered already, which is I like helping people, right? I get a charge out of that. I like helping people. It's not so much an ego thing for me, although that helps. But like I said, it's just the ego is not strong enough to get me out from behind the desk. It's helping people that really gets me out from behind the desk and contributes, and wanting to grow, the PHP ecosystem in South Florida, as well as the United States and all around the world. That sounds huge, doesn't it? But I like to think that every one of us plays a part in that. Obviously me by myself is, I'm not this big, powerful person that can make it all change, but I like to think that I can change some small little part that contributes as well as everyone else, and we can all come together and make it all better. So that's kind of why I do it.
I think you're definitely doing a good job. You're a very valued community member. So let's see. Speaking of South Florida and you've mentioned SoFlo PHP a couple times. What made you want to start that?
There wasn't a user group in South Florida, or at least not one that was active. There was a user group in South Florida that was inactive. It was started by a gentleman who, I use that term loosely, who for years he ran it, and then he started evangelizing Ruby at the PHP meetups, and before long he started losing momentum, and then he started losing the entire group. I reached out to him at one point and said, you know what, let me help you with this. Let me help do some organizing. You can keep the group. I don't mind that. I just want to contribute. And he wouldn't communicate. He wouldn't share back anything. He wouldn't communicate back. So I was at PHP Tech back in 2008 or 9. I forget the exact year, but it was around then, 2008 or 9. And as one of the evening, it wasn't an uncon, but it was just an extra meeting or an extra talk that was scheduled by Lorna Jane. Now I'd talked with Keith Casey. Keith Casey had also contacted me many times and said, Adam, where's the community in South Florida? We want to schedule something. We want to set up some, one-day conference, the Code Works for PHP Architect and things like that. And it was hard to find the PHP community down here because, of course, everybody was nervous about coming out. They were afraid they were going to be preached to about Ruby and other things. But anyway, so Keith kind of helped push me in that direction. Then at Tech, I heard Lorna Jane say, she was teaching people how to start, some positive first steps to get things moving in that direction. At that night, I had made up my mind, okay, I'm going to do it. So I came back to Florida. I started up a meetup on meetup.com, and it just grew immediately. I mean, I had 100 members in the first month. It really took off quick because there was a hunger out there, obviously. Now we're right around 750 members. We're going in June will be our 5th year. So I've been doing it since then. I've enjoyed it. The community has enjoyed it. It's been a very positive thing overall for down here. And so that's how that got started.
Awesome. What are the biggest challenges of running a user group?
Finding mediums. The happy mediums, right? Finding speakers is tough. I mean, I have mentored some speakers down here and done many things to get people to start speaking, but it's hard to get speakers. Now, recently, I started hearing some murmurings about, because I spoke for like 3 months in a row because I couldn't find any speakers. And so somebody said, there's other co-organizers of the group, because I do have co-organizers. And they said, well, why aren't they speaking? Why is Adam the only one speaking every month? Is he not letting people speak? And I thought, got to squelch that before it gets too big, right? So I sent out an email and I said, and the email was basically, we need more speakers. Community is what will keep the group going. And Adam, we can't have Adam talking every month. So please contribute. And so I filled the next 5 months with speakers off of that. So people volunteered. So it's good that we're starting to get that level of cooperation based off of an email. So that's a good thing.
That is awesome. What for anyone who's watching or listening later, if they don't have a user group in their area and they want to start one, what's the best advice you can give someone?
The first thing is just do it. It's easy to let the task look so big in your mind that you don't do it. And so I think the first step is just doing it. Now, if you're in the States, you're not going to beat the momentum that you will gain simply by creating a meetup on meetup.com. Now, in other areas of the world, I understand it doesn't work so strongly. But in the States, that is the way to do it. You will immediately start gaining members, simply because Meetup emails other people in the area and lets them know you're there. So it's a very strong offering. I would say that's a good starting point, is just starting at a meetup.com and start letting the people flow in. And then find a place for a meetup. Make sure you have a decent place, even if it's just your local Panera Bread or something like that. Just get people together, get them out. Don't worry about having a structured talk. Just have a meetup and make it okay. Let's get together and let's talk about PHP. Now, that will only take you so far. Eventually, you do need to have topics, because if you do just a meetup where, hey, get together and talk PHP, that only will work for a little while. People will get bored of it. So now I have a few meetups a month. A couple meetups are structured. There's a set talk for the meetup. And then I have additional meetups where it's like, if you have a PHP question or a PHP problem, just come, we will hack on it, right? The formal meetups with the scheduled talk, generally we can pull 20, 30 people for that. But the meetups that are just bring your problem and let's talk about it, you usually will end up with 5 to 10. So again, I've found a way to make both work. Recently, the members have asked me to do that, the open meetup where you just come and talk about it. They've asked to do that twice a month. So now we're going to be up to 4 meetups a month. Two of them will be the open topic. One will be a structured topic in Boca, and another one will be a structured topic in Miami. Boca and Miami are about an hour apart, but that's 80 mile per hour apart. And in South Florida, traffic, it's very dense. So it's impossible for people in Miami to make it to Boca, and hard for people from Boca to make it Miami. So we have to have the 2 meetups. And generally, they're the same one. It'll be the same topic at both meetups. So it makes it kind of easy. The speakers just have to, the speakers commit to talking at both of them. Maybe not both the same month. Maybe they'll cover the topic 1 month in Boca and then 2 months later in Miami, and then somebody else will do the same thing. So we kind of reverse them. So far, it's worked.
That's awesome. Do you attend all of these meetups yourself?
I try. I do quite a bit of travel between conferences and consulting, so I don't necessarily make them to all. And my wife would like me not to make it to all of them. So anyway, I'm going to start working with that. I need to get some more people involved in Miami. I live in Boca, so for me to make it to Miami is a little bit of a chore. But I think I would like to make it to all the Boca ones, and then have somebody else be able to run the Miami ones, with me not being there. Sometimes that happens. Like I said, I do consult and I do go to conferences, so sometimes those things, keep me away, and there are other people who can pick up the slack. But yeah, so I guess I try to make it to all of them, but can't always make it to them.
Wow, 4 a month is impressive, very impressive. And it's great that you have such a vibrant community down there that you can sustain that.
Yeah, but it's a passion, right? It's a passion for me, and it's a passion for the people who come out to the meetup. I mean, if I wasn't passionate about it, I couldn't possibly make it to more than one meetup. And keep up with my running, and keep up with the conference organizing, and the consulting, and everything else. I mean, there's a lot. I keep my plate pretty full. It keeps me out of trouble.
Right. So we got some questions in from Davey. Number one, how is Ladies' Night going? Are you still doing that?
No, we're not. I wasn't able to get enough participation to continue it in 2015. But in 2014, we did okay with it. The idea was to have a separate night toward the end of the month where it wasn't necessarily a ladies' night where only women are able to come to the meetup. It was a ladies' night, as in we will have a lady speaking. but the attendance is completely open. And of course, we did it on a Thursday because Thursday is ladies' night, no matter where you go. And it went pretty well. We got we had a few women speaking, and those women are continuing to speak. And that was kind of the goal of it, was to get more women active, right? And not active as in just showing up, because we do have, we average about between 20 and 30% female participation. We do pretty good as far as that diversity goes. But the speaking was a bit off. So my goal with that was to, okay, women, come speak, and it worked. It worked. We got some women active and speaking, and some of them are talking about speaking at conferences and things like that. They don't feel they're ready for that. So I'll continue to light that fire, but yeah, so it worked out pretty well last year, but then it started waning off toward the end of the year, where I wasn't able to continue it this year. I didn't have the time to continue chasing for it. So maybe I'll bring it back later, but for right now, I couldn't continue it, at least for the first half of this year.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, but for user group organizers, it did work out pretty well. I would encourage user groups to give it a run, and just create the day and send out, blast out some emails, and I think they might be surprised in women who jump on it and take advantage of it. Then we can get some more female speakers in PHP. That would be a good thing.
Yes, that definitely would be. So I want to kind of transition and talk about Sunshine. Mm-hmm. So how did you go from doing a user group to deciding to organize a conference?
So at that time, I was a freelance developer, right? I was working freelance for a number of years, and I tried to go to one conference a year. Well, that year I went to Tech, but I wasn't able to go to ZenCon. The first morning of ZenCon, I'm sitting at my desk doing some coding, and I start seeing the tweets roll in, right, from the attendees at ZenCon. We're here, the talks are going well, the tutorials are going well. And I said, okay, enough's enough. I need to make it to more conferences. Well, and making it to conferences isn't always that easy. I mean, if you add up a conference, even a community conference at $200 to $250, that's not your only expense. You still have travel, you still have hotel, you still have food, you still have, if you're a freelance developer, you're giving up making money during that time. So it can get quite costly. And I wanted South Florida to experience that. I wanted more developers from South Florida to get out and feel the community, participate in the community. So I said, okay, the first morning of ZenCon, I sent a message to Pablo Godel, who's a good friend of mine from Miami. He was the originator of Server Grove. I sent him a message. I said, let's do a conference in South Florida. And he said, wow, that's a good idea. Maybe we should look at that. And I said, let's call it Sunshine PHP, because this is a sunshine state. So we'll make it Sunshine PHP. I immediately registered the name on the domain name.
Because that's what we do.
Exactly. So literally 45 minutes later, I tweeted that we're going to create a conference in South Florida in February. I figured that would be a good time, and I've timed it between Confu and Benelux. I was like in between those two, and I thought that's perfect, right? And within 5 minutes, Rasmus Lerdorf sent me an email and said, Adam, how'd you like me to come talk? Now, keep in mind, Rasmus had come down and talked to the user group before. So he was aware that we existed. And but the tweet, he just, literally 5 minutes after I announced it, he's sending me an email and saying, hey, how'd you like me to come talk? So I had my keynote, right? And I was like, okay, this is awesome. There's my opening keynote. Because if anybody can put butts in seats, it's Rasmus.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we just grew it from there. So literally from the end of October to February, which was roughly 4 months, we completely organized the first conference, did the call for papers, and got everything up and running. The Server Grove guys said I was like Martha Stewart on steroids getting it together, because I did it as a one-man thing. And I have many people who helped me during the conference, but for the most part, leading up to the conference, it's a one-man show, doing all the organizing. And it keeps me busy, but I enjoy doing it. And I am pretty organized, so I keep all my spreadsheets and my lists and everything. It's pretty much automated at this point. I just check off the list as I go down each item, and then and it's done.
Awesome.
So we just finished our third year, and it's grown. It's been big. Our first year we had 180 attendees. Then we went up to 250-ish, and now we're 300 or more. And next year will be interesting. I have to figure out what I'm going to do.
What have you learned, do you think, the biggest lesson you've learned or take away from organizing a conference?
I think the biggest lesson I learned is that there are so many people out there who also want to help. I didn't anticipate the level of participation that I got from the rest of the community. People willing to come to Miami to speak, traveling, leaving their families, leaving their homes to come to Miami for a week. Now, granted, Miami in February is kind of a win, right? The weather's nice and it's not too bad. But that being said, for people. I think that the PHP community as a whole does step up and does it. They're willing to come out and they're willing to come out and help make the PHP community in South Florida great, as well as the other communities. I mean, they do. You have Lone Star, you have Northeast PHP, you have Midwest PHP, Open West and Ski PHP, which is coming. We're going to have Pacific North. To do great things, and the community steps up to help make it happen. So that's my biggest lesson, is that there are a lot of people out there willing to give.
Awesome. And yeah, by the way, great idea, February, Florida. It was. Do recommend anyone who has not been to Sunshine PHP, definitely go. It's an amazing conference. Adam does a great job, and it's Florida in February. Speaking of conferences, you are also organizing ZenCon this year. Is that correct?
It's a natural step, right? I mean, I do an okay job at organizing a conference, and I work at Zen, so yeah, of course.
How's that going?
But that's a lot of fun. It's going pretty well. I mean, last year I helped with it. I wasn't one of the primary organizers last year, but I kind of helped with it. But this year, I'm one of the primary organizers. There's 3 of us that are the primary organizers, me, my boss, and his boss. So that's kind of interesting. That's an interesting dynamic, working on a level playing field with your boss and his boss, all of 3 of you being organizers of the same conference. But that being said, it is interesting. But it's going pretty well. We're taking on some new challenges. We're not going to do it in California this year, as it's been done in the last 10 years. We're moving it to Las Vegas, because we want to get more people involved. The thing is in California, we were kind of limited on space. We're also limited on the amount of travel and the amount of expense that people can consume by coming to ZenCon. So the idea is moving it to Las Vegas. We're getting more community involved because it's cheaper to get to Vegas. Air travel is less expensive. The hotels are less expensive. The hotel per night is half the cost that it was in California for the attendees. So in California, it was $200 a night for a hotel room. In Vegas, you can stay at the Hard Rock Hotel, where we're holding the conference, for only $95 a night. So it's really a huge difference. And not only that, I mean, it's Vegas. So there's, right. I mean, granted, in Santa Clara, you're close to San Francisco and those areas, so you could go do some sightseeing. But in Vegas, there's just so much more life, so much more action happening, and it's all right there within a couple square miles. So we're kind of looking forward to that. We're hoping to get a little bit larger attendance, but not so much because we're money hungry or anything like that. It's not about that. It's about growing the community. We want to bring more of the PHP community together. So we're having dedicated tracks for all the major projects. Of course, we can't have them all, so we chose some of the largest. So we had Symphony and Zen Framework and Drupal and Magento and Joomla and WordPress. I mean, the idea is we want to bring all these communities together and share a little bit more than has been done in the past. There's other conferences over the last year or 2 that have started doing that as well. Not so successfully, but I hope that ZenCon and the other conferences can all be more successful moving forward by bringing these various communities together, because we need to communicate. PHP is a huge space, and if we don't communicate amongst ourselves and work to make every little niche better, we won't stay the lead, right? We won't stay on top like we are as far as the technology, and we won't continue to advance the technology so that we stay there. So it is important that we talk amongst ourselves, the various groups. And so that's kind of why we're taking that on. And hopefully we get enough talk submissions, because the CFP is happening now up until May 15th. So hopefully we get enough talk submissions in the various groups that we're able to do the dedicated tracks we want to. So far it's been pretty good. We still have another couple weeks left in the CFP, so we'll see what happens.
All right. So anybody listening, if you want to speak, ZenCon, CFP's open. Go do it now.
Yes,
well,
please.
Not now. When we're done. Wait until we're done. And then,
yes.
So how is ZenCon different than organizing a community conference like Sunshine?
Oh, it's bigger. So you're looking at literally 3 to 4 times the attendance, and 3 to 4 times the sponsors, and the sponsors are different with ZenCon. So whereas with the community conference you get a lot of companies, but with ZenCon, I mean, with Zen Technologies, of course, you have Zen Server, Zen Framework, Zen Studio, the whole Zen stack behind it. So there tends to be a lot of corporate behind it, a lot of enterprise level companies that get involved, and that is sponsorship wise as well as attendee wise. So and that's another win for having all these various technologies come together. Drupal and Laravel and Symfony and WordPress and all these different niche projects will gain visibility to the enterprise market, which they might not have today. You know, not that they do or don't, it just helps, right? Because Zen kind of brings the enterprise market to PHP, so to speak. So that's different. It's a little different crowd to work with, as for the sponsors and attendees go, because it's in a community conference, it's kind of like, you know, hey, we're all a family, let's get together and have fun. But when you're talking enterprise, you have to have the community as well, because that's where your speakers come from, and that's where the vibration comes, or the vibrant nature of the community comes from. But at the same time, talking and presenting with the enterprise crowd is a little different. So that it has its own challenges.
So you almost touched on a question that we had that I was about to segue into, so I'll ask it anyway.
Okay.
So it came in from Ben Edmonds. He said that there has been a complaint in the past that ZenCon has been kind of corporate. Is that embraced by the conference, or do you have plans to address or change that?
I don't think so. And here's why. So ZenCon brings the enterprise to PHP, and that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. We need the enterprise to help carry PHP to the next level. Otherwise, you're not going to have PHP being used by the major companies, right? If we're not able to, if there weren't a company like Zen to stand up and say, we will stand behind PHP, Mr. Corporate America wouldn't use PHP. They would use .NET. They would use Java. They would use the other companies who or other technologies that have a corporation to stand behind them. Zen is a corporation that is able to stand behind PHP and say, we will warranty that stack. And if there's a problem with it, we will fix it. And that's where Zen comes in. So we have to incorporate that into the conference. And it's very important. It's very vital to keep the PHP ecosystem going. Otherwise, we'll just be a bunch of hobbyists out here not making any money. And you know, I don't mean to make that sound cold at all. I am very pro community. I'm just a realist, right? Without money, the PHP community will only go so far. Right. Somewhere you have to have money coming in to carry it forward. So yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. We need to bring the money in. We need to bring the enterprise in, but at the same time, we need the community to help drive it as well. The two have to come together, and ZenCon is the perfect place to bring it together. It's we can have a community feel and have a lot of fun as a community, and I'm going to bring some new things to ZenCon to help make the community part of it a little bit more fun. But at the same time, we do have to have the corporate side. Otherwise, why are we doing PHP? It's just, you know, it'll just become a hobbyist thing and not gain momentum.
Okay. So I mean, it sounds like a good marriage between the two, and a beneficial one. You cut out a little bit there when you were talking about the tracks, and it caused some tweets to come in. So is there or is there not attempting to be a Laravel track at ZenCon?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Yes, we are. We are pushing. We are expecting to have. I mean, and you can find all that on the CFP site. So go to cfp.zencon.com, and the tracks are listed there, and they're listed on the current of zencon.com. So you can see all the tracks that are listed there. The idea is to have all those tracks. Of course, that hinges on the community submitting the talks, and also to other people submitting the talks, even if they're not community. Please submit the talks so that we can have all the tracks that we desire, right? We can't pull the talks out of thin air. Adam can't be the only Laravel speaker or something like that. And we've got talks from many people. I mean, there's a lot of community members who have gotten behind it from those various communities, but we do need more in order to get a good diversity of talks in each of the areas that we hope to have a dedicated track on.
Okay, so again, said it before, I'll say it again. If you want to speak at ZenCon, if you love Laravel or any of other amazing community projects, go submit an abstract to the CFP after this.
Yep.
Now, having talked about, a larger, more corporate conference and then the community conference, both of which you're very involved in, we had a question that pertains to conferences.
Okay, now I can hear you. You cut out there for a moment.
Oh, sorry about that. So,
nope, you're back now.
What are you doing to increase diversity at Sunshine and/or at Zend?
So, my idea is to I like more diversity. At Sunshine, we had a 31% female speaker ratio at Sunshine. So I think we made good headway there. Now that, and actually that wasn't a conscientious thing. It wasn't something that we set out to do. We did by all means reach out to the various communities that females tend to hang out in PHP, and we said, hey, please submit talks. And as far as the keynotes go, I did select a couple female speakers that I have great respect for, Erin O'Neill and Purnima from California, who's not even part of the PHP community. I just know Purnima through other people in the PHP community and through her work with Femgineer. But so I reached out to them. But other than that, the female speakers at Sunshine earned their spot. We have more females in PHP speaking now, or at least submitting talks now. And that's a great thing. So now we as conference organizers have more females to choose from. That has been a problem in the past. When you only have 3 or 4 females submitting talks to begin with, it's hard to choose 30% female speakers, but fortunately with Sunshine, we reached out, we screamed about it and got enough women motivated enough to submit talks so that we had that base to choose from. So I would say that part of creating that diversity is getting the community mobilized to get women submitting talks to begin with. And I think that partially comes from the user group level. I think we need to motivate our user groups, much like I have done at Sunshine with the Ladies' Night last year and some other things, to get women motivated to do more speaking and feel more welcomed to speak. I think the user groups leading the march on that will trickle into the conferences, and so I encourage that.
Definitely, and I think having been at and spoken at Sunshine, it's a very inclusive conference, and you did a very good job there.
Thank you.
And I would only assume that the same is going to be true at ZenCon.
I hope so. Currently we don't have enough female submissions at ZenCon, so please get out and submit. We've got a few female submissions, but not as many as a percentage as we had at Sunshine. So we need to change that.
Yeah, and so there's one thing. It's been a controversial topic I've seen at least once, if not more, recently. With conference organizers like yourself putting out call outs to women to submit. And then you have people that say, oh, well, you're giving them preferential treatment now. Just to be clear, I'm making an assumption here because I know you. I would assume that you're not taking gender into account when you're actually selecting talks. And it's just an effort to be inclusive, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no preferential treatment at all. the speakers are chosen based on merit. Now, most people that know me know that the way I choose talks, I'm very strict in the way that I choose talks. I generally don't pick, for a conference, I generally don't pick new speakers who have not spoken before. So just use that. Please go out and speak at your local user group first, gain some momentum. I don't think that introducing a brand new speaker who has never spoken before at a conference where people are paying $200 to $600 for their seat or more, I don't think that that's a benefit to the speaker or the audience. Now, granted, there are some people who are natural speakers, but I'd say that more often than not, that's not the case. So I know there are some people out there. When I say, I'm not going to have a new, I won't break in a new speaker at a conference. Generally, there are a lot of people who take up arms about that, and they're like, "Oh, well, I spoke for the first time at a conference." Well, that's fine and well. If another conference accepted you, that's perfectly good. If you were a good speaker, bonus. But generally speaking, that's not the case. Generally speaking, good speakers are made. They're not. They're not born. It's not always the rule, but it generally is. So I am kind of strict when it comes to selecting speakers, and I don't give any preference based on sex at all, or color or anything. I look at the abstract. I look at the title. If the title grabs my attention, I read the abstract. If I like the abstract, I look at the past speaking performance by that speaker, and then I look at the name. So really, I don't even know the gender or the ethnic origin of the person based on their name, because that's the last thing I'm looking at. I'm choosing the talk and rating the talk, and then I look at the name. So that's that.
And I think that's commendable. And I only ask because there have been plenty of Reddit threads blowing up about that, and it's really a horrible misconception.
There's a lot of people who claim that their conference is going to do blind selection, and I think that's a huge mistake. But to each their own, right? If that's what they want for their conference, that's fine and well. I do kind of do blind selection because I'm looking at the name last, but I'm not doing blind selection based on performance, because I want to see past talk ratings. Now, that doesn't mean I choose somebody only if they have all 5 stars on their talk or anything like that. I just want to make sure that they've talked in front of a group before.
Right.
If they've talked in front of a group before, I'll coach them, right? I'll help mentor them. I think when I gave you your feedback at that time, you only had 1 talk under your belt, which was at True North. And then you were getting ready to speak at Sunshine a few months later. And I gave you feedback on your True North one prior to you speaking at Sunshine.
Yeah. I had actually spoken, I gave a lightning talk and then a talk at Laracon, and then True North.
Oh, that's right. Laracon. I forgot you did that one too. Yeah. But for the most part, you were a brand new speaker. You'd only spoken at a couple prior to Sunshine, and that's perfectly fine. I don't necessarily choose somebody based on have you given 100 talks. I just want to make sure that the person has spoken in front of a group at least one time prior. Doesn't even have to be the same talk, as long as they've spoke before in front of a group. That's really what I look for.
Right. And from my experience, and most conferences do this, if you're a new speaker and you've never spoken before and you have an idea, there's usually uncontracts.
Right.
Where you can, get up in a smaller room in front of a group of people and
exactly
do a lightning talk. And it's a good primer.
Yep.
If you pass that on stage, you probably don't want to speak anymore.
Right.
Or you might love it. So
now I will say this, even though I'm very strict on my ratings, I'm not the final say-so, even for Sunshine. I have a community, or a committee, rather, at ZenCon, at Sunshine, and I've been on many other committees for other conferences and helped them select talks. So even though I'm strict, doesn't mean that a person who has never spoken before will never speak at Sunshine or will never speak at ZenCon, right? It's not my choice. I'm just part of the committee. So I can be overruled, and I have been overruled. But that being said, I just don't want people to feel that, oh, Adam will never accept me because I've never spoke before. That's not always the case. There's a committee with me. I'm not always the only person. That would be boring, and I don't think that me making all the decisions would be a good thing for any conference. Or one person making all the decisions for a conference. I don't think that would be good.
Yeah, no, I like the committee approach. I recently helped out with selecting talks for a conference, and it's different. It was a lot harder than I expected, to be honest. I don't know how you guys do it.
It's daunting when you gotta whittle, 500 to 600 talks, because at Sunshine and ZenCon we get 500, 600, and this year we may even break 700 with ZenCon. To whittle those down to 30, 40, 50 talks is daunting.
And they all sound so great, and you just want to select them all and have all of them come.
Yeah, we could have a year-long conference if we selected them all.
Yes. Okay, so one last thing that I want to talk about, because we're running up on time. And then, yes, for anyone who's watching, I do have an announcement. We'll get to that. Run Geek Radio. What's that about?
That's a new podcast. It's mine. I created a podcast. So a lot of people who have heard me speak before or know me from the community know that I love to run. I run a lot. I run, anywhere from 30 to 100 miles a week. When I'm in peak training, closer to 100, but I run a lot. So I have some knowledge that I can share there, because there's a lot of people who maybe they don't want to run crazy miles like I do, but they want, they're interested in learning a little bit more about running. I constantly get questions when I'm at conferences, and that is like, how can you run? It hurts my knees when I run. It hurts this when I run, and I'm not doing something right. And so, or how do I do the nutrition? I get lots of questions. So obviously there's people out there that want to know, who aren't necessarily daily runners, but they just have questions, right? Because running is very healthy for you. Done correctly with the proper form, there's no better exercise than running. And I also wanted to share some bits about technology. So it just makes sense. Run Geek Radio is my baby for that. I had the first episode a few weeks ago, and then just yesterday or day before, was it yesterday, day before? I think it was the day before, I actually launched the second episode. Tremendous response. I'm surprised at the amount of people who want to hear it. But so far it's been going pretty well. And I thank everybody for coming out and listening. But we'll see how that goes. My intent is to continue to do it every 2 or 3 weeks, for as long as it happens, right? As long as I get listeners, I'll do it, because I like contributing, and it's just another way for me to contribute, to share my adventures, both in running and in technology. I have my running blog at crazyfloridian.com and my technical blog at geekyboy.com. So now I have rungeekradio.com for the podcast, and it kind of brings those two together. And it's interesting.
Awesome. So I know a lot of people listen to podcasts while they run. Would it be too meta to listen to Run Geek Radio while running?
No, not at all. So the idea is that I cover things at a high enough level that it can be listened to, but at a technical enough level that I hope people get something out of it. Now, it's currently we just had the first episode and second episode, so I haven't really dove too deep into anything yet. I mean, I have shared some packages that I used recently and things like that as recommendations. But I haven't dove too deep that it would be too technical for somebody running. I listen to podcasts while I run. And so my goal is to have another podcast that folks can also listen to while they run or while they're coding, listen to it in the background for those who are able to hear voices while they're coding. I can't. I have to listen to techno or something like that with no voices. And I get in the zone with that. But some people listen to podcasts and are able to still be in the zone. But anyway, to each their own. But yes, it can very much be listened to. So far, the 2 episodes that I do have out there are only 30 minutes apiece. So it's not a very long podcast. And my goal is to stay somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. I know there's podcasts of all varying sizes and lengths, and I've listened to many of them. But I think 30 to 45 minutes is long enough for people to hear my voice. So that's what I aimed at.
Well, good. I have not had a chance to check it out yet, but I definitely am going to, and I suggest everyone else does too. And we are about 15 minutes over on time right now, so I guess there's nothing left to do but talk about announcements. So I am super excited to announce officially that I will be stepping up as the U.S. lead for PHP Women.
Yay!
So I'll be helping Michelle and Leineke, who are the co-presidents over in Europe, and I will be taking care of all the U.S. goings-ons. So super excited about it. I'm really looking forward to the future of it. And I haven't even announced it on my blog yet. So anyone watching this now, you now know before everyone else. And if you have any ideas for PHP Women, or if you want to get involved or volunteer, you should definitely tweet me or email me or smoke signal me. And I'd love to hear about it.
Now, from what I understand, PHP Women is not just women, right? So maybe you might want to speak to that a little bit for the listeners who aren't aware that PHP Women is not just women, but it is to help, in that area.
Absolutely, yes. So PHP Women is not just about women. Davey, man, obviously, was the prior U.S. lead. And we've had lots of amazing men involved. I know that I'm really good friends with Yaron and Frank Dionga. I butcher his name all the time, but I know personally they have been volunteers and worked as PHP Women booth. And it's really about creating an inclusive place for all of us, and kind of helping with diversity. And it's definitely not. I would actually never be involved in something that was just for women. So it is not that, despite the name, I guess. So for anyone who's not aware, you can check it out. If you're not familiar with PHP Women, we do have a website. It's phpwomen.org. And of course, PHP Women on Twitter. So, yeah. Anywho, we are a bit over on time now. And it's been great speaking with you, Adam. It's been an absolute pleasure. This is probably one of the more fun ones that I've done. So I really appreciate your time. And I learned a lot. I love learning about your journey and kind of your methodologies behind conferences. And hope everyone else enjoyed it.
Was awesome being on and great talking with you too.
Well, thank you. And everybody have a good night.